Hello, DawgNation. It's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And what do y'all say this Monday we get together with the Alabama Crimson Tide and play for a national championship? I cannot wait for the game on Monday. Cannot wait to talk to you about it today. That includes Seth Emerson, a whole lot of fun as well. We'll examine a way in which Georgia's approach to Alabama may be a little different than maybe some of the national experts might think. I'll explain it starting the program off as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a terrific video up on the internet. Jordan Rogers, the SEC network analyst, looking at kind of a side-by-side comparison of Jalen Hurts and Jake Fromm. And what Jordan Rogers says is that he thinks that Jake Fromm has the edge against Jalen Hurts in the national championship game on Monday. I think that Jordan Rogers is right about that. This is a fascinating video. You should check it out for yourself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to the video of Jordan Rogers comparing Hurts and Jake Fromm. I'll put it up when we put the audio version of the show page up at DawgNation.com. A lot of you watch the video now, especially as of late, it seems. But if you normally watch the video, if you go to the website DawgNation.com today, when I post the audio version of the show, just look for a link in there. It'll be the Jordan Rogers video of kind of comparing Jalen Hurts and Jake Fromm. And in this comparison, what Rogers does is sort of break down some film about what he sees Hurts doing wrong in the game against Clemson, what he saw Jake Fromm doing right in the game against Oklahoma. And in particular, Jordan Rogers' breakdown of Jake Fromm is pretty fascinating here. And I think that overall, the take that Rogers has on the Hurts-Fromm comparison, I think is the accurate one. And by the way, I'm no Johnny-come-lately to this discussion. If you listen to me here on DawgNation Daily or if you watch SEC Country Live, you know that I have been emphatic that I think that Jalen Hurts, the Alabama quarterback, has some problems. And I think when you look at Georgia's opportunity to win this game against Alabama, I think you circle the name Jalen Hurts as the opportunity that Georgia must exploit if it wants to win this game. Because, I mean, look at almost every measurement possible. Higher completion percentage for Jake Fromm over Jalen Hurts. Higher yards per attempt average. Look at as like CFB Film Room has done at throws of 20-plus more yards down the field. Jake Fromm, going back to November, the last time they published these stats, Fromm in the month of November, from that point since the beginning of the season, had been 45% on his throws of 20-plus yards down the field or more. Conversely, Jalen Hurts only been 29% in that same kind of deal. So you can go kind of side by side, look at the numbers over and over again, and you do see numbers that back up the point that Jordan Rogers made on the SEC network, that Fromm, even though he's just a true freshman, and Jalen Hurts, even though he's a sophomore and that he's done nothing but win for Alabama, the numbers seem to suggest that Fromm does give Georgia an opportunity that maybe Hurts is going to struggle to give Alabama that same kind of opportunity. It is fair to point out, though, here, even though there were some struggles in the game for Hurts against Clemson, when it was over earlier this week, when Nick Saban met on the college football playoff coaches teleconference the national championship game, he actually offered a bit of a defense of his quarterback for what happened against the Tigers. Here is Nick Saban talking about Jalen Hurts.
You know, Jalen did a good job of controlling the tempo of the game, and I think that every player on our team would probably say that there were things that he could have done better in the game, and Clemson's got a really, really good defense that put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, so I think all in all he handled it pretty well, but there were some things that I think we need to do better offensively, and I think that's a team thing, not just a quarterback thing.
So Saban says it's a team thing, not just a quarterback thing, that he's going to look at his entire offense overall as why it's maybe not getting the job done as much as they would want to, although it is fair to point out they had a fairly convincing win against the reigning national champions. So from that standpoint, maybe things are not all so bad there in Tuscaloosa, but there are clearly some tough questions being asked about Jalen Hurts and some pretty bold statements being made about how he compares to Jake Fromm in this game on Monday night. Now, it's not just the Clemson game in which Jalen Hurts has had his problems. Go back to the Auburn game, the Iron Bowl at the end of November. We talked about it on DawgNation Daily. We talked about it on SEC Country Live. We thought here that Jalen Hurts was the reason that Alabama lost that game. Saban was asked this week to kind of, talk about Hurts coming off of that game and kind of what kind of motivation he felt to improve his play, given the fact that he may have figured into an Alabama loss at Jordan-Hare Stadium earlier. Once again, though, Saban getting the chance to talk about Hurts sort of pivots it back to the entire team, the entire offense. Here's Saban once again.
I think the entire team was trying to reestablish the identity and didn't feel like we played like we wanted to play, at Auburn. And I think, everybody had to take ownership for that. And, I think our players did. So I think that was more of a team thing than any one individual.
So once again, kind of saying, hey, this is not about Jalen Hurts. This is about the entire team. But the truth is, the entire team, other than Jalen Hurts, is pretty stout. You got a phenomenal collection of running backs. You've got, I think, the best collection of wide receivers, believe it or not, in the entire country. The guy that seems to be the vulnerable, the sort of vulnerability there would appear to be Hurts. And it's not that Hurts is an incapable player. He's certainly done plenty this season. He's obviously dynamic with his legs. But on a virtually perfect team, you sort of seek out the imperfections wherever you can find them. And he may be the one spot that I think that Georgia's got to seek out in this game on Monday night. This, by the way, a relevant conversation given the way a lot of national media folks feel that the Georgia offense is going to match up with the Crimson Tide, because a lot of folks think that Georgia may not be offensively able to do the kinds of things that has caused the Alabama defense trouble. Let me give you an example of that here for a moment from Chris Lowe. Chris Lowe is a writer for ESPN.com, certainly weighed in on the SEC a lot over the course of his career. He was in the Alabama sports radio station WJOX earlier this week. This audio got put out on the internet here of Chris Lowe talking about Georgia and its comparison to Alabama. He thinks Georgia is actually a more favorable matchup for Alabama than Oklahoma would have been because of the dynamic nature of the Oklahoma offense compared to the Georgia offense, which is a little bit more like what Alabama's used to playing in the SEC. Here's Chris Lowe.
I think this is what Alabama wanted. They much prefer, I think, this matchup as they would to Oklahoma. Because if we go back and look, who has Alabama struggled with over the last few years? Teams that go fast and have a quarterback that can move around like a Baker Mayfield. That's not to say they wouldn't have won the game, but they have struggled more against those type of teams than a traditional offense like Georgia.
It's not just Chris Lowe who feels this way. Georgia, with its, quote, traditional offense, the way that he described that, is that the kind of opponent Alabama would prefer to play? Well, it's not just Lowe who thinks so. The national radio host Colin Cowherd kind of thinks the same thing. Here is Colin.
I was the one that advocated get Alabama in. Okay? People think I'm anti-Alabama. I'm the one that argued Alabama's the best team. Let's get it right. Let's just get it right. Don't worry about being right. Well, the conference, you have to win this and you have to win that. Don't put up qualifiers. Let's get it right. Alabama's the best team. Get them in there. I thought Alabama beat Clemson. Now, I did think they had a chance to lose to Oklahoma, but they're not going to lose to Georgia.
See here Colin Cowherd say they might lose to Oklahoma, Alabama would, but they're not going to lose to Georgia, basically echoing some of the same stuff that Chris Lowe just said there from ESPN. Let me make kind of a surprising statement here, and then I want to pivot back to the initial conversation, which was about Jake Fromm and Jalen Hurts. You may be surprised to hear that I think to a degree Chris Lowe and Colin Cowherd are both right about how they view the Georgia offense in comparison to the Oklahoma offense for Alabama. There is a degree to which the Oklahoma offense would have been more challenging than Alabama based on the teams that we've seen beat Alabama before. I think they're actually right about that. But here is where things, I think, get interesting on Monday night. What Chris Lowe and Colin Cowherd may be wrong about is the fact that Georgia may be actually more capable of doing at least some of what Oklahoma does well against the Crimson Tide on Monday. Maybe springing some level of surprise, I guess, maybe, towards Alabama on Monday night, and leaning a lot more on Jake Fromm in this game than maybe some national experts think they're going to. I mean, if you're a Chris Lowe, a writer for ESPN.com, or Colin Cowherd, a radio host on Fox Sports Radio, and you think that Georgia's just going to come in here with the most conservative sort of 5-play game plan and just keep running tailbacks up the middle over and over and over again against Alabama, I don't think you've paid attention to the creative nature of the offense that Georgia showed against Auburn in the SEC championship game. A lot of what it did on the Rose Bowl, in addition to big-time plays from running backs, you also had some creative stuff kind of sprinkled in there as well. And I think that you'll see a lot of that against Alabama on Monday night. And I think Georgia probably sees the same thing that we see here on DawgNation Daily, an advantage for Jake Fromm over Jalen Hurts. And Georgia may actually lean more on Fromm than some people think. And by the way, if it does, it sounds like Nick Saban, who at one point in time owned a commitment from Jake Fromm before he ultimately became a member of Georgia's 2017 class, it seems like Nick Saban sees a lot in Jake Fromm that he likes. Saban also talked about Fromm a little earlier this week.
We thought he was a fantastic player, very instinctive, very smart, makes great choices and decisions, always puts his team in the best play that they can be in. I think he does a lot of check with me's, which for a freshman quarterback is probably demonstrates his knowledge of the game and preparation and intelligence, and he's always been a fantastic passer and remains that way. And we thought he was a great player. We had him in camp, and we were excited to have him be a part of our program, but we also understood when Kirby went to Georgia and Kirby was recruiting him that there was a chance of that happening.
I mean, listen, Georgia's got great running backs. They're going to use them on Monday night almost for sure. But the bottom line for me on this discussion is we're 15 games in this season. The notion that Jake Fromm's some true freshman you have to hide, that's a passé conversation. That's early October. That's late September discussion. Now, Fromm's been through the rigors. He's been through the wars. I think Georgia wants to put the ball in his hand on Monday. I think Georgia's going to play a little more up-tempo and make some, Alabama defend some of the stuff that it wouldn't want to see from Oklahoma. I think Georgia may show some of that, at least a little bit itself, on Monday, and I think that could be the recipe for a Georgia victory here. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Whether Georgia plays more up-tempo with Fromm on Monday or not, we'll keep talking to you about it every single day here on DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're glad to have you with us, no matter how you've accessed us today, by video on the DawgNation Facebook page. Of course, it's good to be with you live at 10 a.m., on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. That's always a lot of fun. And, of course, in podcast form, wherever podcasts are found, iTunes, SoundCloud. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. It is good to have you with us. And looking forward to seeing you tonight for an absolutely gigantic evening for us, our Marlowe's Big Game Preview. The biggest of the season starts tonight, 6 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. I'm going to be there. The legendary former Georgia quarterback David Green's going to be on hand as well. The address is 3575 Durden Drive, Northeast, in Brookhaven, a terrific shopping center that hosts the Marlowe's in Brookhaven, and Marlowe's in Brookhaven will host us tonight for the DawgNation Marlowe's Big Game Preview. Once again, tonight, starting at 6 p.m., Marlowe's in Brookhaven. I'll be there. David Green's going to be there. If you want to talk to David Green in kind of a private, intimate setting, this is a great chance for you to be able to do that. We'll also have a live broadcast, and we've got some giveaways as well. And Marlowe's will always, just like tonight, give you that free appetizer with your entree purchase there at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. It's going to be a lot of fun at 6 p.m. tonight. I want to transition here and get into our Simply Smarter game planning for a moment, brought to you by Aldi, the home of Simply Smarter shopping. And as we look ahead to the national championship game on Monday, some of those Simply Smarter game planning moments, I think right now, sort of factor in on some key injuries and how this is going to play into the game plan for both of these teams. We know that Charlie Warner, the Georgia tight end, who was heavily used, he had 3 catches in the Rose Bowl. That's essentially about 50% of his total for the season coming into the game, but he does leave the stadium there that night hobbled a little bit. We don't know much about his status as of yet. We do know that for Alabama linebacker Anthony Jennings, Nick Saban, when he spoke to the media this week, acknowledged he was facing an injury, and at the time, Saban was relatively tight-lipped about the status with Jennings. Here is Saban discussing the injury to his linebacker.
We don't have complete medical information on either one of those guys. They're being evaluated today in Birmingham, so we'll let you know when we find out that information, probably tomorrow. But, we have, Christian and Terrell Lewis and Jamie Mosley's played before, and some of the guys that had to play when the other guys were out got some valuable experience, so that's where we would go.
So that's where they would go if Jennings were to miss the game. As was announced yesterday, Jennings will miss the game. He put this up on social media, kind of a message about his treatment, his recovery, the fact that he won't be there. We'll show you Anthony Jennings here on Twitter, kind of sending that message out there that his surgery was a success. Going to have to wait and see what the next MRI is going to determine. But he's played his last game this season, says he'll be back stronger than ever before later on. But for Georgia fans on Monday, they won't be tangling with Anthony Jennings there. All the more reason, I think, the absence of this, this pass rusher, all the more reason, I think, why Georgia may dial up a little more Jake Fromm on Monday than some people think. I think that's an edge for Georgia. I think that's an example of Simply Smarter game planning. Of course, you're on DawgNation Daily. Simply Smarter game planning, brought to you by friends at Aldi. Make sure you check out the freshly actually, let me try that one more time. Make sure you check out the weekly fresh meat specials every Wednesday at Aldi. When you see the sign, you'll find extra low prices on the very best cuts of meat. But hurry, at these low prices, the weekly supply is limited. All right, before we welcome into Seth Emerson here today, DawgNation Daily, let me squeeze in one more thing here. Greg Bluestein, who covers politics for the AJC, is reporting that President Donald Trump plans to attend the national championship game on Monday. And obviously here on DawgNation Daily, we won't weigh in on this from any kind of like political standpoint. We stay far away from that on either side of the aisle. But I did want to mention this on our program because I don't know if you've ever seen a presidential motorcade before. I have. These things are nightmares for traffic. You close the road completely in every direction when a motorcade is rolling through. Now, I don't know. Maybe Bluestein's got some more details on this in the AJC about what time he's expected to arrive or how that's expected to go. But just take this as a PSA. If you're planning on going to the game, you want to get there very, very early. You want to be far away from the roads if a presidential motorcade rolls through because these things shut down the entire freeway system, anything. I've seen them in action before. They are not to be messed with, so stay far away from a presidential motorcade on Monday. And by the way, if you're not going to the game, then you probably want to stay as far away from downtown Atlanta as you possibly can. So obviously we're busy. A lot going on with the national championship. Also want to reflect back on the Rose Bowl a little bit, too. Let's do some of that right now as we welcome in Seth Emerson.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And we will say hello to Seth Emerson. You know, really, I didn't get a chance to read much of what he had written from the aftermath of the Rose Bowl until late last night, early this morning, but it's terrific coverage at DawgNation.com. You should make sure you check that out. Of course, Seth's going to have a lot leading into the national championship game on Monday as well. And Seth, before we kind of dive into all the stuff here, I was mentioning Donald Trump's appearance before you joined us. I think you would agree. I don't know if you've seen a presidential motorcade before, but these things are massive, massive impacts on traffic, and obviously a bit of a traveling circus when the president comes to town. I guess it makes the game all that much more bigger, I guess you might want to say, but certainly a traffic scenario to be avoided at all costs, correct?
Yeah, I actually grew up in D.C., and I worked my first 4 years out of college at the Washington Post, so we had some experiences with that. There was actually, this happened a couple times where I parked my car around the building, and you know, we would get a message saying, hey, the police are towing cars that are parked there, like legally. And you'd go down there and say, hey, you know, and they're like, you got to move your car. And said, why? And they just kind of gave you a look of, I'm not supposed to say, but you know what that means. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, yeah, the motorcade is, it's, stay away from that. This is probably something that the organizers of the game and people in downtown Atlanta are not very excited about.
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably true, politics aside, in terms of the logistics of the game. I think there's no doubt about that. Georgia has kind of gone dark here this week in its preparation for the SEC Championship, at least from a media standpoint. We'll hear more from them later on the week. But do you have any kind of insight about, you know, what's happened for Georgia the last few days here, both in terms of a recovery standpoint, you know, dealing with the travel, dealing with the intense game against Oklahoma, and preparations for Alabama? Do you have any kind of like TikTok about, you know, how this week may have gone for Georgia up to this point?
Not like exactly a TikTok. I mean, it's something maybe when we talk to them, we'll be able to recreate. Honestly, since all of us got back from L.A., I mean, and everyone was kind of leaving at a different time, we've all just been kind of trying to recoup and recover from our jet lag. I'm sure you have too.
Absolutely.
And so it's not like I've been checking in with people over there to say, hey, you know, what's going on here, what's going on there. But I know that they got back early in the morning on Tuesday, and you know, Kirby said later that day in a teleconference that, you know, they were trying to get the guys to sort of stay on Eastern time as much as possible in preparation for this. I'm not sure. I think they're just trying to treat it like another game week, and just imagine that Monday is Saturday. So if you follow that routine, then Tuesday was an off day, and Wednesday was a kind of back to the grind, I would imagine. I mean, maybe they're changing up their routine in some way, but you know, and you've also got the fact that classes are back this week, so that's another headache. Yeah, you do wonder, and I wondered this heading into the Rose Bowl, whether Georgia, if they won the game, was going to be at a disadvantage against whoever won the Sugar Bowl, because they had to fly all the way across country, whereas the other team was just one time zone. Well, Alabama, not even. They're in the Central Time Zone, so they're not having much of a change. On the other hand, college-age kids are much more resilient than the rest of us. They can probably deal with it a little better, and if Georgia had that same, tripped out 747 that they had on the way out to LA, then that probably made the trip back a little easier.
Yeah, it's probably right. I actually want to talk to you some more about that in just a moment. But let me do one more question about Alabama before we kind of look back. I think that Alabama is justified as a favorite over Georgia here. I think, as most people are going to point out, Alabama is really good in the areas in which Georgia also tries to be really good. And with that in mind, I've kind of made the case that Georgia's best path towards victory might actually be putting the ball in Fromm's hands a little more. And people say, oh, Alabama wouldn't have wanted to play Oklahoma. Well, maybe Georgia kind of using some up-tempo passing concepts the same way that Oklahoma probably would have. Maybe that's a recipe for Georgia in this game. You think there's a chance that's true, or is Georgia going to just try to be Georgia and sort of out Alabama at its own game here?
Yeah, I think they've got to be ready to do either one. To go back to the first Auburn game when they just kind of didn't have a plan B when the run game didn't work. They learned that lesson, and I think they're, to their best effort, going to try to have a plan A, plan B, plan C here. You can't go into this game against Alabama and say, all right, we're a physical run-first team, and we're going to be who we are, because there is every chance in the world that that's just not going to work. They've got to have the pass game to, at minimum, supplement it. And maybe they go up-tempo. I mean, they haven't really gone that up-tempo all year. I mean, we thought they were going to do that against App State, but then they kind of didn't do that. I mean, they do what everyone else does, which is kind of no huddle, but then get to the line and get the play called. And Fromm, to his credit, good at calling the play really quick. But, yeah, I think you've got to do something to try and get Alabama off its game. And I saw a stat today on Twitter. I forget where it was, but it pointed out, when you're talking about Jake Fromm against Alabama's pass defense, that Jake Fromm has been really accurate. Now, he's been mostly accurate, like, on all phases, but he's been really accurate on throws, I think the stat said, of, like, 20 yards and beyond, which is true. I mean, and I'm not talking about, like, deep bombs. I'm talking about those kind of, those sideline passes that he's just so accurate on, or waiting to the right time, hitting Terry Godwin up the middle like he did on that one that set up the Chubb tying touchdown the other night. That he's so accurate on those. Well, the problem is Alabama is great at shutting those down. So, Mika Fitzpatrick is back there, by the way. So that's where, when everyone looks at these matchups, and I remember going into the SEC championship game, or before the SEC championship game, when we didn't know who Georgia was going to play, the smart money among a lot of people was, you want to play Auburn again, even though they had just been demolished by Auburn, because you looked at the kind of revenge factor and letdown factor for Auburn, but you also looked at the matchups and said Alabama's still really tough. Now, 1 month later, Alabama has had a chance to heal up, and I know they lost one linebacker in the Sugar Bowl, but they've still got some guys. He's actually going to be replaced, I think, by one of the guys, Christian Miller, who was hurt.
That's a good point.
For the SEC championship. So they really are, in a lot of ways, mirror images of each other, except Alabama has actually, on paper, recruited better the last 4 or 5 years. That wasn't the case when Georgia faced Oklahoma. Georgia-Auburn may have been kind of a coin flip in pure matchup if you go to the recruiting rankings. Everyone kind of acknowledges, I think Kirby acknowledged this in an interview with ESPN in the lead up to the SEC championship game, that Alabama still got a little bit better talent. That doesn't mean that the whole can't be greater than the sum of its parts for Georgia, especially with momentum, and especially, maybe we're just kind of, maybe we're going to be saying this about Jake Fromm a year from now, but you look at Jalen Hurts and you're like, well, he doesn't do this right. He doesn't do this well, and you say, does Georgia have the advantage at quarterback? Because they have a better quarterback. Do they just have a winner at quarterback? You've got to have intangibles be on their side. But when it comes to matchups, this is a case of, the best things that Georgia does, Alabama seems set up to stop.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Obviously, it became a little bit of a joke, I think, with a lot of the media last week when Kirby Smart kept going back to the phrase, keep the main thing the main thing. For me, though, being in L.A. and Pasadena, and I'll tell you, I'd never been to a major bowl game before, so a lot of that was kind of a new experience for me. But seeing a lot of that and kind of seeing the ways that which both teams were kind of tugged on by, the folks at Lowry's, maybe the folks at Disneyland, some of the entities sort of connected with the Rose Bowl. Keeping the main thing, I will admit, probably seemed a little harder to me than I would have imagined it would have been before you got out there, just because there is just a lot of potential distractions at a place like that. Is it easier to once again use Kirby's phrase, keep the main thing this week, because, to go back to something you said a little earlier, it is a little bit more like a regular football game this upcoming Monday?
Yeah, I think so. I think, this is, all that stuff is taken out. I don't think, I haven't actually seen a full schedule, but I don't think that the teams are like touring the world of Coke this weekend.
Right.
I mean, this is all about a game. This is not a bowl that has tied in sponsorships. The thing that I guess stands out is Saturday morning is media day, where they're turning this into kind of a spectacle like the Super Bowl, where they're allowing fans in to watch us interview the players, which that's just great for those of us who, are actually there to try to work, but whatever. At least the fans won't be mingling with us. Not to disparage the fans and go on a tangent, but, you know too, Brandon, we got to work.
Sure.
But anyway,
sure.
That's the only thing that I think is kind of a distraction that I know about. Otherwise, this is just all about a game, and I think that'll help both teams kind of have total focus.
I mentioned this before you joined us, that I had a chance to read a lot of the stuff that you wrote, not in the moment. I didn't read some of it until this morning. I'd heard about the story that you'd written about the squib kick. I had a chance to actually sit down and digest that whole story this morning, and I hope people read that for themselves, because I don't know how much of this you want to reveal. I would obviously encourage people to just kind of read the entire thing for themselves, but along the way towards what could be a national championship, a lot of guys who do what you do for a living end up writing books. I don't know if you'd ever write a book about this Georgia season or not, but the squib kick and how Georgia gets the play called and where Jim Chaney was during all of that, I got to tell you, that's the makings of at least one chapter in a pretty good book, is it not?
Yeah, I wrote that chapter on Monday night on deadline. Now, that was kind of the product of, there was an open locker room, and Shane Beamer was the one who told us about Jim Chaney, not making the play call because he was on his way down to the field. And that basically, Kirby and James Coley and Beamer and coaches just got together and said, all right, well, what do we call here? And I imagine Coley, being the former offensive coordinator and usually in the room with Chaney, was the one that's, all right, how about this one? And it worked. But when you think about it, everything, just imagine Georgia doesn't get that field goal. For one thing, there isn't the momentum. They kind of stifled Oklahoma's momentum going into the half and gave their defense actually a little bit of a pick-me-up, and then the defense comes out and gets 5 straight stops to start the second half. But then there's just the pure matter of the points, the 3 points. You don't go to overtime. Now, maybe the game gets played a little differently in the second half if Georgia knows that they still need 3 more points, but and let's not remove also the squib kick is amazing. I didn't see it in real time. I did not see Tay Crowder's catch of it until the next day, watching a replay, because in the madness of it, I'm gathering quotes and everything, including from Tay Crowder. But the catch is great.
Yeah.
And if he bobbles that, they're not able to get 2 plays. They're not able to get a quick offensive play and a field goal. Also, very heady by Georgia's staff to say, let's get a play to set up a field goal, instead of let's try a Hail Mary here, because I think it was 5 seconds officially on the scoreboard, not 6.
Right.
So a lot of coaches might have said, it's not going to be enough time. We don't have a 3 or 4 second play here. We just try the Hail Mary. And then just, like I said, Rodrigo hitting the 55-yarder. So many things, so many elements came together for a play that will, especially if they win this Monday, will go down in Georgia football lore.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Baker Mayfield, having a chance to see him in person, he's obviously a very good player, but I was just really taken aback by how different he is than the typical SEC player. You know, it's like he was sort of constantly doing things where I felt my eyes being drawn towards him, whether it be the way that he was celebrating after every Oklahoma scored in the first half, or I'd even noticed some of the things that were going on before the game and when she was down there on the Georgia side of the field. I mean, are you like me in that it had to have been a little bit of a culture shock for Georgia to see this player drawing attention to himself in a way that Georgia players, Alabama players, really even Auburn players, you know, the top players in the SEC, just kind of don't seem to do. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. I thought some of this stuff was a little overblown. I mean, I love Davin Bellamy, but he's out there saying, humble yourself, and you kind of wanted to be, you know, they scored 48 points. I mean, yeah, they only scored 11, I guess, or 14 in the second half and everything, but you know, Mayfield had some good stuff to say after the game. He always seemed, he's the kind of guy who always seems to say the right thing when the microphones are on. And he said that in the post game, saying, I want them to go win. You know, nothing ever like disrespectful, it seems, comes out of him when he's being asked by people like me and you questions. It's when he's between the lines that he gets in trouble. And apparently, to defend Davin Bellamy now, although Davin didn't say exactly what it was other than the pregame receivers thing, which didn't seem like a big deal, but Mayfield apparently said some things in trash talk during the game. He did something to rub Davin Bellamy the wrong way. So, you know, but he is on the field for his just pure quarterback skills. I was just struck by his accuracy. There were some throws there, especially in the first half, that it was like, wow, I can't, you know, that's something, especially for a guy who's 6 foot, 6'1", whatever he is. I think it's 6 foot, because I'm 6'2", and he was definitely shorter than me. You know, to a guy that's not seeing over the offensive line the way a Jacob Eason would. The throws he made, particularly over the middle, were just really impressive.
Yeah, well said. All right, Seth, we're looking forward to a lot of your coverage of the national championship game on Monday. As you said, it's going to be a busy weekend with Media Day and everything going on with that, so there'll be plenty of read at DawgNation.com. Hope you get rested up, get reacclimated to the Eastern time zone here, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
All right, talk to you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff there from Seth Emerson. By the way, we're going to have more on the Davin Bellamy Baker Mayfield exchange coming up in just a moment here on DawgNation Daily as we transition to our SEC Through. I will tell you a couple things here. First of all, I'm making my triumphant return to AT&T SEC Country Live today. Feels like I haven't hosted that show for like 6 months. Like Ray Goff was the coach of Georgia the last time I was on SEC Country Live. At least that's the way that it feels like. But nonetheless, I am looking forward to being back today, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country Facebook page. And as we transition to the SEC Through, I'll also remind you the DawgNation Daily is brought to you in part today by ATL Next. A new ATL starts now. ATL Next is Hartsfield Jackson's development program that consists of a series of projects over the next 20 years. Learn more about roadway impacts and nightly closures at next.atl.com. All right, a couple SEC stories here. First of all, there is this. Brett Bielema goes in the coach's film room, sort of second screen experience, para-broadcast, whatever you want to call it, to the Rose Bowl on Monday, and he's critical of Jim Chaney during the game. Now, for the country, most people are going to say, hey, this is Brett Bielema criticizing his former offensive coordinator. Obviously, Chaney worked for Bielema there at Arkansas. This, to me, is also an example of a theory that I've had for a while, that Bielema is pretty popular with fans. I think even Arkansas fans, for the most part, liked him up until the end. The media loves Bielema because he's outspoken. I feel like some of Bielema's coaching colleagues probably don't love him, and I think we've seen some examples of that from time to time, and this may be another reason for some coaches to sort of raise an eyebrow at times to Bielema, criticizing Jim Chaney during the coach's film room broadcast. Now, I'm going to grant you, what Bielema said is that he thought that the play calling from Chaney in the first half didn't make very much sense, given the fact that Georgia was having success with its running backs and maybe didn't run Chubb and Michelle enough during the early portion of the game. It'd be hypocritical for me to say Bielema's wrong for giving opinions. That's what I do for a living. He was paid to do that in that game, so from that standpoint, he's doing what he needed to do. I'll just reemphasize what I said yesterday, or what I've said throughout the week since the Rose Bowl. Jim Chaney's got a thankless task. He's going to be criticized in the first half for not running Chubb and Michelle enough. In the second half, he got criticized by some fans for being too conservative on that one series in which Georgia went 3 and out because he didn't keep his foot on the pedal or whatever thing you want to use. The fact of the matter is, offensive coordinators are always criticized for the same thing. It's not being too conservative or too much of a gamble. It's just ineffective plays. Occasionally the plays you call don't work, and some of the ones Chaney called on Monday didn't work. But overall, I thought it was a pretty strong game plan by the Dogs OC, who certainly had plenty of reasons to take a bow this season. Speaking of coordinators in high-profile situations, Dave Aranda, I guess, according to a report from Ross Dellinger from the Baton Rouge Advocate, is going to stay at LSU. He had been pursued hard by Texas A&M to become its defensive coordinator. That's a program that can throw around big bucks. LSU apparently throwing around big bucks to keep him. I believe it's Adam Rittenberg from ESPN who gives us the contract details here. $2.5 million per season to keep Aranda at LSU. Now, he's almost certainly maybe in line for a head coaching position after next season, so the long-range deal may not matter much here. But this is heavy, big-time money just to hold on to a defensive coordinator, but maybe LSU felt like they had to do it. By the way, SEC Country is also reporting that another assistant coach is staying put. Brian McClendon is probably not going to be the South Carolina offensive coordinator, although he was victorious in his play-calling debut for the Gamecocks against Michigan in the Outback Bowl. But SEC Country is saying that McClendon is not leaving South Carolina, expected to stay around. He was offered, I think it was the same position, wide receivers coach at Tennessee. Obviously, he worked with Jeremy Pruitt, but it sounds like McClendon is going to stay put at South Carolina, at least according to what our friends over at SEC Country on the South Carolina page are reporting. C.C. Jefferson putting it out there on social media, some talk about his senior season. That means the Florida defensive lineman looks like he's planning on coming back, being a part of the thing for the Gators. I think this is a crucial addition to Florida's 2018 team, at least if you thought Jefferson might be leaving. Maybe the addition is the wrong word here. Retaining him, a crucial retention, I guess is the better way to say that. I think that Dan Mullen in Florida needs all the help he can get. Lost a lot of talent to the NFL last season. That obviously hurt Jim McElwain in 2017. I think holding on to Jefferson would be a crucial move there for Florida. Looks like Jefferson knows who his position coach is going to be as well. Sal Sunseri is leaving the NFL to come to Florida. He'll take that job. He was the Raiders' defensive line coach. Looks like he's going to take the same position there at Florida. And speaking of Tennessee from a moment ago, a lot of quotes coming out of these high school football all-star games. It seems like Tennessee's doing a pretty good job right now with its recruitment of Jacob Copeland, the 4-star wide receiver from Pensacola, Florida, and J.J. Peterson, the big-time outside linebacker from down there in Colquitt County. Both Peterson and Copeland are big-time players, and they've got quotes here as of late that suggest that they are pretty happy with Jeremy Pruitt. Pruitt had been instrumental in their recruitment when he was at Alabama. Now they're both looking forward to doing some more visiting with Tennessee there. Ultimately, I don't think Tennessee gets either of these players, but as of now, Jeremy Pruitt at least done a good job in kind of getting Tennessee to kind of climb the list for both those guys. We will make that your SEC through. Okay, so here on DawgNation Daily, I actually want to go back for a moment to something that Seth Emerson was talking about a moment ago. The exchange there at the end of the game, or when it was over on the field, between Davin Bellamy and Baker Mayfield. Bellamy, who was obviously bothered and upset with some of the antics of Baker Mayfield, kind of told him after the game, well, we'll let you see it for yourself. And if you're listening on our podcast, you can hear the message that Davin Bellamy had for Baker Mayfield. You may have already enjoyed this, but certainly this is the kind of thing that dog fans like to see again.
Humble yourself. What happened in the second half?
So why was it that Bellamy was so upset there? Why did he feel the need to scream, humble yourself, to Baker Mayfield? Even in the elation of winning the Rose Bowl and moving on the national championship game, Bellamy still wanted to send a message to Mayfield. Well, we know that one of the things that Mayfield was doing before the game, kind of running around on Georgia's side of the field, running those routes on the Georgia sideline here. If you're watching on video, you're seeing this right now. Mayfield there on that side. And of course, a lot of cameras everywhere he goes. Then you see, some Georgia players telling Mayfield to get back on his end of the field, get back on his side of the field there. But Mayfield, obviously, whether that's gamesmanship or if he's truly oblivious to that or whatever, Mayfield in that moment had kind of done some things that had sort of made some Georgia fans upset. And some Georgia players even. You saw the reaction of the Georgia players if you're watching this on video. And then something else that happened during the game, and this was absolutely a big topic of conversation for the fans on social media during the game. After Rodrigo Blankenship had missed his first-half field goal, Baker Mayfield running off the field, giving the throat slash gesture. You can see in Sports Illustrated caught this on Twitter and tweeted it out. Baker Mayfield saying it's over to the Georgia team. That's the kind of thing that Georgia's just not going to like. And Seth Emerson had some great quotes from Davin Bellamy explaining a little bit more about how he felt about that, about how he felt about this is the wrong kind of team to get fired up, the wrong kind of team to kind of get engaged in that kind of behavior. And I think that Davin Bellamy's right. This Georgia team has fed off that kind of stuff all season long. I had talked about this being almost like another chapter in the revenge tour. The same way Georgia avenged all its 2016 losses, avenged its only 2017 loss to Auburn in the SEC Championship, and kind of had some fun at the expense of Gus Malzahn and what he'd said after his Tigers beat Georgia back in November. The Baker Mayfield storyline here seems to sort of fit right into that and kind of fall into the same kind of discussion. I guess the question that's worth asking here, it's probably fair to bring up, did Georgia truly humble Baker Mayfield? Oklahoma scored a bunch of points. The Oklahoma offense was kind of flying all over the place, but it's worth pointing out that most of that was only in the first half. As Bruce Feldman pointed out in his piece at SI.com, if you look at the action for the Oklahoma offense after the half, for the second half and into overtime, Oklahoma averaged just 4.2 yards per play. They've been over 9 yards per play in the first half, but for the second half and overtime, they were just 4.2 yards per play. And Baker Mayfield, who was strutting around and talking about how this game was over by the time it got to half, well, after the half, Baker Mayfield had just 87 yards passing. So did Georgia humble Baker Mayfield? Maybe is not for the entirety of the game as some Georgia defensive players would have wished. I know Kirby Smart himself was a little frustrated by the fact that Oklahoma had scored so many points. But listen, these offenses are designed to compile yards, and when you compile enough yards, it's going to equal points. Oklahoma's a good team. It had a recipe for how it performed all season long. It brought some of that into the Rose Bowl against Georgia. But when it was all said and done, the Georgia defense did do its job. The Georgia defense got off the field and collected stops in the second half, and especially during overtime. And Davin Bellamy played a key role in that, as well as Tyler Clark and Roquan Smith, who was just a missile during overtime. So when it was all said and done, was Baker Mayfield humbled by Georgia? I think that he probably was. I think it's the kind of game where the Georgia defense ought to feel pretty good about the fact that it took a punch in the face and it dusted itself off and it got right back up, and it was the one doing most of the punching after halftime. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here on DawgNation Daily, a couple of points I want to bring up here. First of all, we're thinking about the national championship game, but we never stop at least partially thinking about next October in Jacksonville. Y'all know we do the Gator Hater Countdown every day here on DawgNation Daily. We'll do it again today. 296 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, maybe carrying the national championship trophy with them, maybe showing that thing off to the Florida Gators, show them what they missed out on for 2017. Maybe that's the way it'll go. Either way, it's 296 days from right now. It's our Gator Hater Countdown here on DawgNation Daily. And if you were anywhere in the Atlanta area, I saw our buddy Raymond Cox living up in South Carolina is going to have to try to fight the snow to get down to us tonight. Some of y'all making drives from a long way away. You're dealing with the snow. Well, whatever you got to do, be safe, but get there. Marlowe's Big Game Preview, Brookhaven location tonight, 3575 Durden Drive. 3575 Durden Drive starts at 6 p.m. David Green's going to be there. It's going to be a great time. Hope to see you there. And for those of you with us on video, first of all, thanks for being here. Really appreciate that. A lot to get into from our discussion. Love what Jason Daniel says. Just one more to go, and boy, I can't wait for that one more. It's going to be a great day and a great moment for the Georgia program. We will talk about that. Casey Cochran says update on Charlie Warner's injury. So all we know is what has been said, and thus far there has not been a whole lot said about it. He does leave the stadium on Monday in that, I don't know if it was a walking boot. That may be the wrong way to describe it. He was certainly hobbled as he was kind of walking out and going out there. So Kirby Smart won't speak to the media again for a few days, but when he does, we'll try to get an update from him on exactly where things stand with Charlie Warner. And as some of y'all have kind of pointed out before, the Warner injury is not an insignificant one. Think about Alabama in its last two national championship games. After not really using the tight end at all much in the season, dialed up O.J. Howard in a big way against Clemson last year. Didn't work out. Alabama lost the game. But the year before that, I think O.J. Howard was really the hero. The tight end was really the reason why Alabama won the 2015 national championship. And there had not been a lot to make you think that Howard would be the key player in that game. And yet for the Crimson Tide in the 2015 national championship game, that's exactly the way things kind of worked out there. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. You'd obviously like to have full health at the tight end position. Warner had been used in a big way against Oklahoma, so hopefully he's okay. Greg Knight making the point that we kind of talked about early in the show. Hopefully Georgia can run some high-tempo offense against Alabama. Deshaun Watson, Clemson have done that with success, and Georgia's built a little bit differently probably than those Clemson teams are, but I do think trying to do some of that's an important thing for Georgia, especially given the fact that, and listen, I'm not going to tell you that I, have read the Georgia playbook or have, broken down every one of these, games on film, but the one thing that other people have said, and we seem to see with our own eyes here is that Jake Fromm is really good at making quick decisions. Think about the tempo with which that he started the Appalachian State game, for instance, when he came in there. After the Jacob Eason injury. You make a few completions, all of a sudden you can move a little faster. And, I think that Georgia is the underdog here, and I think it should play. I think it should play like the underdog. Now, dogs aren't a significant underdog to Alabama, but Alabama's a point spread favorite for a reason here. And I think that Georgia has a little bit of freedom. I don't mean wide freedom here, but I think a little bit of freedom to kind of try some stuff, experiment a bit, try to confuse Alabama, make them deal with what they don't want to deal with, make them do with what might make them a bit uncomfortable. I think Georgia's got that freedom in this game. Kevin Blackman says, I think Jim Chaney called the Auburn game better than the Oklahoma game. Boy, I don't know. I mean, hard to nitpick too much in a game in which Georgia scored 54 points, though, right? Tim Horn says, good to see you back, BA. Go Dogs. Yeah, Tim, obviously we've been here every day, but this is only our second day back in our studio with the team all around us here. It is good to have everybody here and have me back in Atlanta. It's just a little easier to do the show from the home base, so it's nice to be here. Francisco Hurtado says Chaney should move Fromm around outside the pocket. Yeah, I wonder about that, Francisco. I understand where you're coming from. I understand why you say that, but I want to be careful putting Fromm in harm's way too much. I want to be careful about that because obviously Alabama's going to try to get after him some. So, whether it's the read option stuff or whatever, I don't mind Fromm keeping a play alive with his leg, but I don't necessarily want to see him, used as a runner too much or even put in a position where he might have to try to pick up a couple yards with his legs because obviously at that point in time, Alabama's going to be looking to lay the lumber. Edwin Joseph says the seniors will inspire the team again. Edwin, we will never get to see what that pregame speech is going to be like. Or maybe it's not even a Saturday morning type deal. Maybe it's a Friday night. I've heard about that in the past of, everybody's there and, a guy like Nick Chubb, gets up there and has a message to the team in the hotel on that Friday night. Can you imagine what that speech must be? I mean, can you imagine what those guys are going to call upon to kind of reflect on just how important it would be for them to go out winners? And I get the impression, every football team wants to sort of put forth the image as if it has great chemistry, right? Every coach wants to believe that he's the kind of coach that creates that amongst his players, and every group of players want to believe that they're special, that they're somehow more connected than other teams have been. I think it's just a natural tendency that we have as people, not just that those guys have as football players. I just think that's a natural part of humanity. We want to feel connected. We want to feel like the thing we're a part of is bigger than the normal type of thing. It's extra important. For these Georgia players, they may actually really feel that way about these seniors. They may actually feel an extra level of motivation to send them out as winners. And one of the things that I found, and I'm going to be on a tangent here for like 2 seconds, then we'll get back to the comment. But one of the things that really impressed me last week was in those media day type moments when Nick Chubb, Isaiah Wynn, even Roquan Smith, who's probably not going to be back at Georgia next season, when these guys were asked about culture change and things like that, at one point in time, Nick Chubb was even asked about how he thought Georgia compared to Alabama, and what he said was, "Hey, you can't do that in just 1 year. Alabama's been on top for a long time. You can't do that in just 1 year." And I found that to be kind of interesting because, in a way, Chubb was diminishing the importance of his year, right? I mean, this is the year in which Georgia's kind of risen to the top of the national level. And some players might have said, hey, this is my team. This is the year we did it. and that's how great it all is. But Chubb's word was almost like, hey, it's my team that's getting this started, and then we're going to pass the baton to the next Georgia team, and then the team after that, they're going to keep this thing going. It's almost like based on those words, and I don't want to read too much into them, but it's almost like based on those words that these guys really do put a lot of stock in getting something started that's going to continue long after they're gone. You can go back and read the transcripts yourself. A lot of these are videos we post ourselves on the DawgNation Facebook page, so you can see all of this for yourself. I thought that was just incredibly insightful, that these guys seem to be motivated by more than just going out on top as winners themselves. They want to be a part of a group that starts some winning that lasts long after they're gone, which obviously, as a Georgia fan, is something that you really enjoy the thought of. Mark Dumas says, how about the Dogs get Chubb, Sony, and Swift all in the game at the same time? That might be a lot of fun. I don't quite know who that would be at the expense of, but it's an interesting thought. Lavelle Hughes says DeAndre Baker, Walter Grant are going to have big game. Bellamy and Carter need to play like their hair's on fire. Yeah, that's probably true. I do think you mentioned DeAndre Baker. While I am no fan of Jalen Hurts, at least in terms of his on-field performance, I think that he leaves a lot to be desired as a quarterback. I have got great respect for the Alabama wide receivers. And the one thing in that Jordan Rodgers video that if you go to when we post the audio version of the show, go to DawgNation Facebook. I'm sorry, go to DawgNation.com. I'll put the link to the podcast. I'll also link the Jordan Rodgers video that I talked about off the top of the show here today. And one of the things that he showed you on the Jalen Hurts game against Clemson was the flea flicker that they ran, and Hurts had an open receiver, and he just misfired on that open receiver. And that's obviously a bit of a blight on Jalen Hurts, and one of the reasons why Jordan Rodgers was giving an edge to Jake Fromm. And while I do take comfort in that from a Georgia perspective, that Hurts can at times be an inaccurate passer down the field, I do believe that the Alabama wide receivers are good enough to continue creating separation between themselves and the Georgia defensive backs. And it would not surprise me, when Oklahoma struck deep late against Georgia, they connected in a big throw. When Missouri threw deep against Georgia, they connected on some big throws. I mean, I think Alabama, Brian Dable, the offensive coordinator, has seen that. I think he knows his own personnel. I think that he knows that he's got an inaccurate quarterback that has a very strong arm. It would not surprise me if Alabama throws deep more often against Georgia than it has at any point in time this season. Because, Hurts in terms of the intermediate passes and in terms of that kind of stuff, he's just not that accurate. But if he has receivers that are continually getting open, he's got a strong enough arm to get it to them, even if he's occasionally overthrowing guys or maybe at times underthrowing guys. He's definitely got the arm strength to get it there if he's not always completely accurate. And Georgia's defensive backs are just going to have a hard time covering the Alabama wide receivers. That's the biggest spot of vulnerability for Georgia in this game. So you'll lean on Hurts as a potential weakness for Alabama, but you have to have a lot of respect for the Alabama wide receivers. That's an area in which I believe they're going to probably try to exploit. Christopher Moore says the national columnists have been giving Tay Crowder some love. That's a nice thing to see for sure. Jonathan Allen says no matter what happens, just remember that Georgia's ahead of schedule. I think to the degree that you want to say that Georgia's going to be back here a lot in the future, I think there's a chance that's true. Kevin Mills says, haven't watched Alabama a lot this year. Is this Alabama defense great? I thought, and some of y'all saw more of the Sugar Bowl than I did, I thought that Alabama played in that game a lot more like it has historically than maybe it has at any point this season. I think the thing that sort of held back the Alabama defense from being as great as we typically think about it being is the fact they've dealt with a lot of injuries to linebackers. Christian Miller missed a lot of the season. He's back now. Mack Wilson missed a lot of the season. He's back now. Anthony Jennings gets hurt in the game against Clemson. He'll be out. He'll be replaced by some of the guys that I just mentioned. So I think that's one of the things that's kept the Alabama defense from being as good as it typically is. But the other thing that jumps out at me about the Sugar Bowl, and I mentioned this, I believe, yesterday, is I thought the Alabama offensive line, just given the circumstances and the opponent, had to have played its best game, right? The Clemson defensive line was probably the best in the country. And Alabama's offensive line opened up holes and really moved the football against that unit, gave Hurts some time, opened up holes for the running game. The Alabama offensive line, while it's one of the best in the country, has probably not been quite as good as we typically have come to expect from Alabama. And yet on Monday in the Sugar Bowl, I think that's exactly what happened there. So that, I think, is a respect. Jeff Dorsett said Alabama only scored 10 offensive points in the Sugar Bowl. Yeah, is that true? I didn't realize that was the number. Christopher Moore says we need Trenton Thompson to have a great game. Yeah, Thompson needs to have a good game. I also thought, and I didn't have time to talk about this with Seth Emerson, but one of the things I wanted to mention with him was the fact that he had gotten some interactions with some Oklahoma reporters, and they were talking about how good of a game that Tyler Clark had against the Sooners. And I think that's true, that while Trent Thompson's the name we have a tendency to think about the most, and he's probably Georgia's most important defensive lineman, Georgia's got some other guys that can contribute in that role, and Tyler Clark was one of those guys that just seemed to be everywhere on Monday in the Rose Bowl, and the Oklahoma folks were noticing that. And sometimes that may be the best overall testament of who's really playing well, because we sort of get used to guys, we're sort of desensitized to guys over time. But what Seth had said was, you can read this from one of his posts, it was the one about the guys from Georgia that could get more attention. But what he said is that in talking to Oklahoma reporters, they were mentioning Tyler Clark like right in the same discussion with guys like Roquan Smith in terms of defensive players that had hurt the Sooners. Al Clements said Auburn played its best game against Georgia. Alabama may have had its best game last week. Hopefully we'll have our best 4 quarters on Monday. Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's going to take a big-time effort for Georgia to beat Alabama. I think that Georgia has a very good chance of winning this game, but this is not one of those games where I say, oh, it's in the bag, Georgia's going to win it. I felt much more confident about Georgia against Oklahoma than I do Georgia against Alabama. Much more confident that it was going to be a Georgia win. Actually, Oklahoma probably played a little bit better against Georgia than I would have expected the Sooners would have. But overall, I thought Georgia was better than Oklahoma. Ultimately, Georgia won that game. Against Alabama, I think Georgia might be better. I don't know for sure that it is. I mean, as we've kind of said, as we've kind of rolled through all of this, all the things which Georgia's building, Alabama's kind of been there for a while. And I didn't hear Kirby Smart say that Alabama's got slightly more talent than Georgia, but I do believe that's true. Georgia's working on a number 3 overall class for 2017. Those guys are in this roster. Before that, you're talking about, sort of bottom of the top 10 type classes. I think you had number 6 overall mixed in there, but it's a lot of 6, 7, 8, 9s for Georgia in those recruiting rankings. Alabama, number 1. This is a roster made up of about 75% former 4- and 5-star players. You've got to respect that. You've absolutely got to realize that Alabama has talent in every spot, and the way that Georgia is able to overwhelm most of the teams that it plays, that's the recipe that Alabama is also using. So I do think that Georgia's path towards victory here is to do something a little bit different, either than A, Alabama expects, or maybe B, a little different than we've seen all year long. Somebody mentioned Isaac Nada before in the comment section. I'll go back to what we said about O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard became a big part of Alabama's last 2 national championship games, despite the fact that he had not been heavily used in either of those 2 seasons. That is the same kind of DNA from a coaching standpoint that Kirby Smart has at Georgia, and I guess he'll probably try to use some of that kind of stuff too. Terry Crews says Georgia needs to get rid of the ball quickly. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think that Alabama, we've seen them before against Clemson, some of these other teams, that notion of the big 300-plus pound defensive lineman, hands on his knees, maybe a little tired. Can Georgia use pace to its advantage? I think it would be helpful if it could. What are y'all mad at Trey Dukes for? Boy, some of y'all are just – he must have stirred some of y'all up, because every time I look at these comment sections, somebody's beefing with Trey about something. Trey, what have you done to these people today? By the way, I think Raymond Cox in the comment section. Didn't Raymond tell me, are you coming to Marlos tonight, Raymond? You going to brave the snow and get out there? We'd love to see you. Now, in snow, I mean like a lot of snow up like Charleston, Savannah, the coast. This part of the country we think of as like, sunny and beautiful almost all the time, ravaged by snow as of late. Jamie Bailey talking about me on the field with the field edition paper in my hand. Yeah, sometimes the emotion gets the best of me, Jamie. That's probably true. Chip Gromlich thinks Jeb Blazevich going to step up. Eric Bernard Clark says no backpedaling, BA. What am I backpedaling on? I don't want to backpedal on anything. Junk Dog mentioning that I'm sorry, not Junk Dog. Jimmy Moore mentioning Isaac not his drop in overtime. Yeah, I mean that I was right there in front of that thing, in front of him on that. He had that ball in his hand. Ultimately, it all works out. But that was a drop or not, and I agree with what the commenter said that most often Isaac Nott is going to catch that. Diedrich Frazier says a lot of faith growing in the Chaney-Fromm duo. I would agree with that. Raymond Cox says he is going to try to come tonight. Road's still bad here, but trying to leave in the next hour. Raymond, whatever you do, please be careful. Please be careful. All of you, if you're coming to a Marlowe's tonight, be careful getting there, whether you're driving through snow or not. We want you there, but we don't want you to risk your life to get there. Brett Barfield says Charleston got 5 inches of snow. I mean, I love Charleston. It is a beautiful town. I cannot imagine what it must look like with 5 inches of snow. That is crazy. Francisco Hurtado says, I believe our special teams could be the X factor. All right, this will be the last comment. If you'll give me just a minute to respond to this, we'll get ready to get out of here because my folks, they got stuff to do. This is an example of what Francisco Hurtado says about why the Alabama game is a challenge for Georgia. Francisco says special teams could be the X factor for Georgia. That's been true all season long. It could be true on Monday. We saw it be true during the Rose Bowl. Rodrigo's 55-yard field goal. Lorenzo Carter's field goal block. Georgia's got really good special teams right now. But the reason why Georgia's special teams are so good is because they put good players out there. Lorenzo Carter's a future NFL guy, and yet he's contributing to Georgia in every special teams way imaginable. Georgia's elite freshmen, some of which not good enough to play on offense and defense right now, are making big contributions to special teams. That makes that unit good. But with Alabama, you kind of have the same kind of thing going on. Now, the Alabama place kicker's not very good, but J.K. Scott, the punter, is probably the best in the country. He's a lot like Cameron Nisley. He's one of those guys that can really flip the field for Alabama. And Alabama's been using starters and elite freshmen on special teams for quite some time. So this is an example of why I think this game's a challenge for Georgia. A game that Georgia can win, but let's not gloss over what a stiff challenge it is because of all the things that Georgia's used to its advantage this year, like edges and special teams. It's just a lot harder to grab that against Alabama because they do a lot of the same kind of stuff. It's why we love the build-up to the game. It's why we're going to keep looking for those moments in which Georgia can exploit something. We believe Jake Fromm versus Jalen Hurts is an example of that. We'll talk about some more of those with you tomorrow. We'll talk about some more of those tonight at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Love to see you there. Our DawgNation big game preview. David Green going to be on hand. It's just going to be a blast. Y'all, I am so ready for Monday. So ready to just sort of soak in every moment between now and then. Georgia's going to play for a national championship. I mean, that is as much fun as it can ever be. Tonight in Brookhaven, we'll talk to you more about that. 3575 Durden Drive is the address. We'll see you then at 6 p.m. Before that, though, I am back on AT&T SEC Country Live at 3 p.m. Love to see you there on the SEC Country Facebook page. Y'all have a great day. We'll talk to you then.